Hello everyone, welcome to my very first product overview video. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the Creality CR-10 3D printer from GearBest.com. I'm going to be doing just a very simple unboxing, initial setup, and then just kind of showing you everything it takes to not only get this working, but how the mechanics look, how the electronics look, and hopefully by the end of this video doing some test prints. So let's dive right into it. Before I get to the unboxing of this printer, there's a couple things I'd like to mention for the sake of transparency. First off is this printer was provided for this review by GearBest.com, and they did approach me regarding this review. Secondly, I am not being compensated directly for making this video, other than the printer, of course. If you do like this printer, if it is something you're going to buy and you would like to support my channel, in the description below there is an affiliate link that you can follow to buy the printer, and it will give me a commission or a kickback for that purchase. If that is not something you feel comfortable with or do not wish upon me, then you do not have to use that link, and you also do not have to buy the printer either. This video is serving just as an overview of the product features. I am not necessarily reviewing it. I am just showing you what the unboxing looks like, what the initial setup looks like, what the features look like, and just kind of a basic overview of the product. That being said, let's get into the unboxing. I was honestly a little bit surprised during the unboxing. I didn't expect to see kind of a double box. It didn't really have a double box per se, but it had kind of a box around the outside perimeter of the initial box, which was kind of nice to have that extra padding there. I think I opened this upside down, but when I opened up the bottom or the top, I found that everything was encased in actually really decent foam. I mean, it smelled horrendous. It smelled like, fresh plastic, but it's really nice to see this much foam surrounding the printer. So if you're going to get one of these, I really wouldn't worry too much about shipping damage. I don't really see a high potential for any substantial shipping damage with this. Everything was packaged pretty nicely. And here you can see I'm unpackaging all the pieces. There's really not that many. It's just the two parts of the printer, the actual electronics, and then some accessories here and there. Okay, so I've got everything unpacked. It comes in basically two main pieces. You've got the base and then you've got the upright. It actually came with a surprisingly decent amount of accessories. I think this is probably for the spool holder. This is as well. You've got your little clam knife for scraping up parts off the bed. It has a kind of a mini roll of filament, PLA in white, power cord, USB cord, one of these little things for running the filament through. A little tool kit, which inside actually looks like a couple of decent little tools. I'll go into that a little bit later. These appear to be the parts for connecting the base and the upright. And USB reader, yeah, there's a little card in there, so USB thumb drive. This actually appears to be replacement parts. Maybe this is install parts. I'll get into that a little bit later. And then the actual electronics here, and then the manual. This is the manual. It has all of 4 steps for installing this all together. Step 1 is literally just base. That's it. It's just the base. So there really isn't any pictures showing you how to install it, but I don't think it's going to be that difficult. I'm saying that now before I put it together, so we'll see when I actually put this together. The main electronics actually have all these wires just kind of coming out of it, and there's no indication in the instructions where these go. However, if you look closely at the labels, this one is E, this one is X, this one is X again, this one is V or Y, and then you've got Z. So theoretically, these should plug into some pretty known locations that are marked along the printer. So I'll see if I have any issues with this, but I'm going to go ahead and try and slap this together and get it working. Just wanted to kind of show everyone the bottom side of this before I get it fully put together, because I won't be able to flip it over as easy. Here you've got a bunch of rollers, and then you have the leveling for the bed, it seems like. And all these components are actually pretty decent. This is a nice metal plate here. and this actually rolls really smoothly. I was kind of surprised with how smooth this whole mechanism is, so that's kind of cool. And I figured out that you basically have these screws that kind of go in from the underside. They go into the top rail here, and then you have just the uprights that kind of go on like that to hold everything in place. So it really shouldn't be too bad to connect up together. So yeah, I'm gonna flip this around and connect that. Okay, I got everything together and it actually went a little easier than I thought. The instructions, once again, weren't all that clear, but it's really simple just to put this little block over there, that little block over there, screw it in from the back, and that was pretty much it. In terms of the wire connections, that was actually pretty intuitive. I mean, you know, this is going to be your x-axis, this is going to be your y, and then this over here is going to be your z. So everything was pretty well labeled and it could only fit into one spot. Same with the back of the controller. There is 2 cords that screw into the back. They could only go in one location, so that was pretty easy. Of course, I haven't turned it on yet, but that is pretty straightforward. In terms of the tools, it comes with a little screwdriver, which I'm not 100% sure what that's used for. It comes with some Allen keys. The neat thing about the Allen keys is these are actually chrome, not the black oxide, and they're actually ball end Allen keys, which is actually kind of nice. I like that little touch. Ball end Allen keys are my favorite. And then you've got a couple of wrenches. Once again, I didn't really use these. You've got some zip ties, which I'm not 100% sure I would use those, but they come with them. This is funny. This little baggie might not show up on camera, but it actually has just like a 1-inch section of metal. I bet you know what? This looks like it might be the nozzle tip cleaner. Just kind of interesting that this is just in a baggie unlabeled, but this looks to be the cleaner for the nozzle tip. An extra screw for something. Another smaller Allen key. This is probably for adjusting something somewhere, maybe one of these guys. A couple extra of these captive nuts that fit inside the channel, which is actually kind of cool. You have 3 extra and 4 extra screws. So if you want to modify this and add stuff to the rails, you have a couple extra pieces of hardware to do so. And then in here, there's an extra nozzle, which is pretty rad. And then another one of these connectors, which is not this one, but the one on the back of the extruder right here. So you get 1 extra one of these and 1 extra nozzle, so that's pretty neat. So now the next step is to just, I guess, turn it on and see what happens. Of course, I just tried to turn this on and it didn't do anything, so I thought, hey, it's a defective unit. Turns out I was defective. On the side of here, there is a 110-220 switch, and of course it was set to 220, so I'm using the nifty included screwdriver to just slide that over to 110. And now everything works just fine. So be sure to select that switch. And as you can see, it's actually relatively loud. Yeah, so it looks like everything is working. I'm gonna go ahead and home this just to see that everything works fine. Prepare, auto home. So far everything looks good. Before I get to actually using this and printing this, let's go over some of the features of this printer. I want to look at the structure of the printer first. You can see it's comprised mainly of these aluminum extrusions. These are a 20 millimeter squared extrusion. It has 2 types. It's got the single and then the doubles. The singles are used here in the front, the back, this cross beam, and this beam up top. And then the double ones are used on either side for the middle and then both of the uprights. And overall, the structure is a lot more solid than I would have expected it to be, and actually has a bit less wobble and flex than my Taz Series 3 printer has, so that's kind of interesting. The linear motion for the y-axis and the x-axis are both along these aluminum extrusions. As I showed in the beginning, on the underneath side, they have the little V-groove wheels that go along the extrusion, and then of course you have belt drive for both the y-axis here and the x-axis. The z-axis movement is provided by a single lead screw. I'll spin it around and show you that, but you've got a single screw over here. You've got nothing on this side, just the bearings that support everything over on that side, so it is only driven from one side. I'm not sure if that's really an issue, but you know, time will tell. In terms of the extruder, it actually uses a Bowden setup. So there's direct drive and there's a Bowden setup. Basically what it means is here in the head, you don't have the motor. The motor actually sits somewhere else. It sits back here. So this is actually what pushes the filament through, and then your heater and all of that stuff is included in the head, and those are separated. The benefit to doing a Bowden setup is you don't have nearly as much weight on the head, so you're not moving nearly as much weight when you're actually printing back and forth. However, this path has a little bit of flex in it, so when you're pushing the filament through, it's maybe more likely to jam or more likely to clog because you're not actually extruding it right at where the heating tip is. However, this design has been used a lot and is pretty common, so I'm not really seeing any issues with that. Everything is actually very smooth. It's a lot tighter and smoother than I would have expected it to be. I have a Monoprice Maker Select, a Stratasys, and a Lulzbot, and this is actually, it feels pretty good in comparison with all those. I think the Stratasys is the only one that obviously feels a lot more solid. The bed doesn't really thrill me all that much. It is just masking tape on glass held down with these little clips. I guess that's okay. I'm kind of a PEI guy myself, but you do have a nice sheet of aluminum down here attached to the heating element, so there's nothing really wrong with that. This is pretty standard, I guess, at this price point. You could always throw on a sheet of PEI on top of it. Spinning this around to the back, you can see a little bit of the motors and everything a little bit better. Here is the actual extruder. And you notice this is just plastic. This is not maybe the world's fanciest extruder. The gears and the bearings and everything look nice, and it has a nice little spring lever here. It gives a good amount of tension, but there doesn't look like there's any adjustment here. And it's really just kind of open, and the filament just feeds directly in. So this necessarily isn't the high point of this printer. Here we've got the y-axis motor, and as I said earlier, the connections just kind of, go into this. There's really no other place for these wires to go. You've got one for the limit switch, and then you've got one for the motor. Everything is laid out pretty nice. It even has a nice idle bearing for the belt, so that's actually a nice little touch. And then all these end plates down here are metal, not plastic like a lot of other printers, so that's kind of cool. I would like to see pieces like this and like this metal, because there's a lot of metal pieces on it. I'm not sure why some of the more important ones were left to be plastic, but who knows. On the Z-axis motor, as I said, the other two axes are belt driven, but this one is actually driven by a screw. And you've got this nice helical coupler here, so that's actually a nice little touch. These are good for kind of any angular misalignment. So up on top, I'm not sure if you can see this, it does have a 3D printed end cap for this lead screw, but having a helical coupler like this will basically solve any issues with misalignment or issues like that. And as you can see, it moves very freely. I can actually just pull and push the axis up and down, and it's nice and smooth. This is not a traditional screw rod. This isn't a ball screw, I don't think. It looks like a trapezoidal screw, more like an Acme screw. So this is definitely in the middle. You basically got 3 steps or 3 levels of linear motion screw rods like this. You either have just a screw rod, which is, the same kind of threads that you would see on an actual screw. You've got a ball screw, which is on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, which actually has grooves cut in it that are the profile of ball bearings, and the nut itself is filled with ball bearings. This is definitely in between. It is a decent lead screw, but is not a ball screw. But you're not going to find full ball screws on machines of this price or of this size, really. That's going to be more on your industrial machines. And quite frankly, there's no real reason to have a ball screw here anyway. Other than that, yeah, everything looks pretty good. Over here you can see the back of the controller, and it's pretty simple. I like the wire management on this. It gets a little messy with all the wires, but from the printer itself, there's really not that much coming off of it. You could use these zip ties to consolidate this a little bit more, but everything's neatly wrapped, so that's pretty decent. Probably the biggest selling point for this printer is actually the build volume. This boasts a 300 by 300 by 400 millimeter build volume, or 11.8 inch by 11.8 inch by 15.7 inch. That's actually quite large for most 3D printers. Most printers are going to be anywhere, between like a 4-inch cube and like maybe an 8-inch cube. So going all the way up to basically a 12 by 12 by 15 is actually quite large, and on the realm of, like, let's say the TAS 6 or another printer like that. So for the price of, $400 to $500, it does appear to be a pretty good value based on just the build volume alone. The proof is in the pudding, so we need to actually test this out and print something off on it. But so far, I'm relatively happy with the structure itself, and also just kind of like little design decisions on what the parts selection was. So let's see if it can actually print something. Okay, I'm going to freely admit that I made a mistake. When I started to print something, I of course inserted a little thumb drive, and here is what I find. I found operating instructions, installation instructions, reference data. I think this is supposed to be model. It actually, I think, has STL models of the printer. I'll look into that later. And then you've also got printing, like troubleshooting in here. So before I mention that the instructions really weren't all that good, well, I really should have checked the SD card first, because under the instructions, they have a nice thing on the full installation of the printer. So definitely check that first. It even tells you to switch over to 110. So if I had read the full manual first, I would have found all this information. Before I can print anything, I need to set up the bed. Not only do you need to level the bed, but you also need to set the bed distance from the bed to the nozzle. And if you refer to the manual, it kind of has some maybe outdated instructions that kind of refer to some different hardware that I don't have. So I just ended up kind of doing it manually. And you just kind of adjust the screws on the bottom of the bed and make sure that the nozzle is roughly like a sheet of paper away from the masking tape on top of the bed. This process took me maybe about a half an hour. And if you've ever owned a 3D printer before, you know that this is the absolute worst and least amount of fun you will ever have with the printer. And you kind of need to tweak it over time to get everything dialed in. So I didn't really fully dial this in, but I got it to where I was getting successful prints out of the printer. After I got that done, I just installed Cura, which came on the SD card, and then it was time to start printing some stuff out. Here are the completed test prints. I did a benchy, of course, and a 20mm calibration cube. These were both printed using the version of Cura that came with the SD card with the printer, and also the settings that were recommended on the instructions as well. So I literally just took Cura, installed it from the SD card, copied over the settings that they had, and hit go. So you could probably tweak this further or use a newer version of Cura, but this is just what came with the SD card. So I'm going to talk about the calibration cube first. The calibration cube is a very simple 20mm cube that has X, Y, and Z kind of inscribed into it, so you can tell, where you might have issues with your printer. The first thing I noticed was that the print quality was actually surprisingly decent, and if we measure this, yeah, exactly 20, that one a little bit under, and just ever so slightly over. So none of this is really all that concerning, but overall the finish is very nice. If you look at the sharpness of the lines on the X, the Z, and the Y, you can tell it actually printed very crisp, and of course, you know, with the calipers I'm getting very close to 20 millimeters. So this printed really about as good as I would expect it to. The only issue I really had was the bottom layer here. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see that. The bottom layer really wasn't that good, and I still need to do some more work with leveling the bed, but you know, that is the nature of the beast, and especially having such a large bed like that. So overall, this turned out pretty good. I wouldn't expect this to really get that much better from a printer like this. And of course, here is the Benchy. For anyone unfamiliar, the Benchy is a kind of a benchmark print. It has a lot of various features on it that make it somewhat complicated to print. You've got a lot of overhangs, you've got a lot of you know, unsupported holes, and then you have just you know, various features like that all over this. So it's just kind of a good stress test to test a printer with. And I will have to say, this Benchy came out really, really good. I don't really have any major issues with it whatsoever. The only problem I had, once again, was with the bottom layer itself. The bottom layer just really wasn't all that good. The text isn't all that readable in the bottom, but that's more of a bed leveling and bed material problem. Other than that, everything is good. The little features like the little flag holder in the back turned out really great. Even this little hole in the back is really nice. The only problem I had, and the only thing that wasn't like perfect, I guess, is these little arches right there. And on the other side right there, there's just a little bit of overhang and some, you know, gunk that got in the underside of there. The one in the back turned out really pretty good. The little smokestack is nice. Everything else is just really pretty excellent. So I'm very, very impressed with how this turned out. So yeah, that's a good sign. I also tried one last print on the printer just to get something a little bit bigger. This was supposed to be quite a bit taller. This is just kind of a rocket that I found on Thingiverse. And the problem with this was, as you can see from the base, it really didn't end up sitting flat. So when it got up to about this point, it kind of broke free from the printer bed and started moving around, and I had to stop the print. This did, you know, looks really great what did get printed, and everything would have been fine if it had just stuck to the base. So I probably should have done some kind of brim or something like that to hold it in place, because there's just really not that much holding it on the print bed itself. So, you know, that is kind of my one downside to this printer is I'm not a big fan of PLA because it is kind of a little bit more difficult to stick down, and the masking tape just really isn't my jam. So I would do something different with the print bed. Once again, I'd probably do like a PEI or something like that. But for bigger prints, taller prints like this, you're probably going to have to run into that issue. So I don't know what's the current flavor of the month right now, if it's still glue sticks, hairspray, or some other material. But for the larger, taller prints, you'd probably want to do a brim or do some kind of other adhesive method to keep them on the print bed. I wanted to do this shot just to give you a rough size comparison between this printer and a couple others that I had on hand. Over at the far end, this is a Monoprice Maker Select V2 that I essentially picked out of the dumpster from a Craigslist buy because, you know, it's missing a few components and needs to be rebuilt, but that's something else. But yeah, this is a relatively small printer. I want to say it's like 7-inch cubes, something like that is the build volume. So you can see it's a much more compact printer, and not surprisingly, it has almost the exact same controller that the CR-10 has. In the middle here, we have a TAZ 3. The new model, as the filming of this video, is the TAZ 6. So this is definitely a couple generations older, but generally the same kind of style and the same kind of concept as the new ones. And I believe the build platform on this is, for the X and the Y, is going to be about the same size as the CR-10. I think they're very, very close. I think they're both 11.8. The Z distance is different, obviously, because this goes a lot taller, but generally speaking, these are both, you know, a similar class, I guess you could say. And as you can see, the TAZ is a lot heavier, a lot bulkier, and just kind of a lot wider overall. So I don't know, if you have space constraints and absolutely need to make bigger parts, then maybe the CR-10 is the better way to go, but I really wouldn't factor that in too much. But yeah, the TAZ is definitely quite a bit bigger printer than the CR-10, or at least takes up more space. And then of course over here is the CR-10, of course, with the external controller over there. So yeah, hopefully this gives you a better idea of the size comparison between a couple different printers. So what are my overall thoughts on this printer? Well, from the unboxing and the setup, before that, just when I was kind of looking at this thing online, I was expecting it to be a lot lower quality. I was expecting it to be really wobbly, not very sturdy, and just have really low quality components everywhere. I was pleasantly surprised that everything actually seems relatively well designed and relatively well built. So that was a nice pro going for this machine. The other thing, though, on the con side is it is very basic. In this day and age, in 2017, this printer could be loaded with a lot more features. For instance, the controller is using a very old software. It is just a very basic controller. It doesn't have USB, it doesn't have Ethernet, it doesn't have touchscreen, it doesn't have color screen, it doesn't have any of that stuff. It is your just most basic controller. To be fair, this is the exact same thing that is on my Taz printer. However, my Taz printer is 3 or 4 generations old. So don't expect anything new or fancy. This only has a single extruder. It is not a direct drive. I really wouldn't trust this with flexible filaments or nylon or carbon fiber, things like that. You probably would need to make some upgrades to either the extruder or the head or both to have that done. However, if you need to print large parts and you're printing them in primarily PLA or ABS, this printer seems like it would do a very good job at that. The Benchy and the calibration cube were both really fantastic quality, very surprising. These are better prints than I've seen before on some of my other printers. So overall, the quality seems good. It's just that the overall feature set is a bit limited. So you need to keep that in mind when buying this printer. In terms of, for beginners, for intermediate, for advanced, I think that's really up to you to decide. The documentation that came with it and the software that comes with it is what I would consider adequate. It was enough to get the printer going if you know what you're doing. If you're a beginner and you don't really know what you're doing as much, it might be a bit trickier. It came with Cura, it came with all the software and all the documentation necessary to get everything going. However, it didn't really guide you through the steps as much as it could have. So, in terms of someone being a beginner getting this printer, it's going to be up to your skill level and your kind of technical ability on how much you're going to want to look on forums and troubleshoot. For me, I did this whole video over the course of, let's call it about a half a day with filming. So going from unboxing this to getting very usable prints out of it, this could obviously be tweaked and dialed in a lot more to get even better prints that actually work. However, that amount of time is relatively short for 3D printing, so I feel pretty confident that an educated user could go from unboxing to getting prints relatively quickly without a lot of fiddling. The other nice thing is the structure definitely lends itself to upgrades very well. I've seen a lot of people swapping out the hot end for an all-metal hot end, and this extruder is in a perfect location to be able to swap that out to something nicer if you want. So overall, that's just kind of my impression and overview of this printer. For $450, there's definitely a reason why it's $450 and not $1,000 or not $1,500. But I guess given the fact that it is $450, it seems to be worth that, or at least have some value given the print size and the quality of the prints that I was seeing initially. So yeah, that is my recap of the CR-10 3D printer. If you want to follow me on Facebook, that would be awesome. Get updates on my new videos. You can also check me out on Patreon to not only see all the special stuff that I have there, but also to check the channels that I follow. And also, once again, in the description down below, there is an affiliate link. So if you are going to get one of these printers and you did find this review helpful, you can follow that link and it will give me a kickback to support my channel. However, there is zero obligation whatsoever for that. So thanks for watching and see you in the next video.